Dilam Shidobis, good morning. Thank you very much for the organizers. I have been through this conference from yesterday, and I was very impressed by the quality of discussion and debates. And I hope we will continue on this level than yesterday. And today we have a very interesting discussion on the deeper engagement with the EU and what are the realities, prospects, and modalities. I want to introduce Mr. Vigenin, who is the chairperson of the Committee on European Affairs and Oversight of the European Funds of National Assembly of the Republic of Bulgaria. And I think it's very important for us, the countries that aspire to become the members, to learn from the relatively recent members, because as far as I know, it's almost 11 years that Bulgaria became the member of the EU.
Well, thank you, Ms. Vashakidze. I think we need to leave probably a bit more time and space for discussion, because the topic is very interesting, and it's an area where we could have a lot of exchange and ideas how we can work on this issue from now on, because it's something in development. But before that, before I say a few words on this topic, I would like to congratulate Georgia. I've realized that it's exactly 20 years since my first visit to Tbilisi and Georgia. At that time, I was an activist of a youth organization, and through the years, I could see the changes in the country and in the capital as well. And I can say that maybe you living here, you can't notice it really, but it's amazing what you have achieved in a very difficult environment when it comes to the economy, also security. And I have the chance to work also actively in the OSCE Parliamentary Assembly, so I know very well your difficulties from this point of view, and the fact that despite that you were able to achieve so much is really something that we should honor. So thank you for the invitation as well, because I think it's very important to be able to exchange ideas and experience, especially now after the Eastern Partnership Summit. I'm one of the people who advocate giving EU perspective to the Eastern Partnership countries from the very beginning, initially as member of the European Parliament, now as member of the National Parliament of Bulgaria. At the same time, I think we need to be very careful, and it's a huge responsibility on the side of the Eastern Partnership countries' politicians, including Georgia, not to create too high expectations, to base also internal political messages on realities within the EU, and to manage the expectations, because we also had this problem when we were preparing for the membership. The expectations were very high. People believe that joining the EU will suddenly create wealth and prosperity for everyone, and of course this could not happen. It did not happen, especially not that quickly. I think we see the same phenomenon here as well. I mean, every time countries ask and expect more from the European Union that it is possible to be delivered right now, especially with regard to possible EU perspective. And then there is certain disappointment. I mean, we have to take into account what is the situation in the EU, the fact that it is going through, before that, through a crisis, now through certain, I would call it transformation. It's trying to find its way, new, I'd say, new form, new way of functioning, new purpose. And in these periods of internal transformation, it's very difficult to open too much the door for other countries to join. And we have this problem with the Western Balkans right now. Bulgarian presidency will try to focus a bit more on the Western Balkans, which already have the EU perspective. And the messages we hear from a number of countries member states, I mean, are not very positive. That's why I think we need to find the best way to move forward, not to ask for too much with regard to political commitments, which is a bit more difficult, and sometimes it can hardly be explained to the citizens of some of the member states. But I think our approach, and it's linked to the topic we have today, should be to do our best to make Eastern Partnership countries as much as possible linked to the EU and also interlinked, so that at a certain moment the membership itself will become a very natural step. I mean, let's make these countries part of the EU before they're actually politically part of EU. Which means that step by step we should increase the involvement of these countries in all the policies, or at least all the important policies of the EU, a process which has already started, but it should be accelerated. It started with the signature and entry into force of the deep and comprehensive free trade area agreements with 3 of the Eastern Partnership countries, which would mean that once they're fully implemented, which is a long process, by the way, and needs a lot of work on the side of Eastern partners, would make these countries' economies literally part of the single market, to high extent, let's say, not fully, but to high extent. Then it would make these economies much more competitive and much easier to integrate fully than once the countries, I believe, will become part of the EU one day. The same goes, Marian Lupu mentioned the energy policy of the European Union and the fact that the countries now have the possibility and the prospect to become part of the energy systems of the European Union. Of course, it takes time, investment, money, but still it's an option which is extremely important, because energy security or higher energy independence gives, of course, much more freedom to these countries to make their political choices as well. And I know well what I mean, because it concerns also a number of the Southeastern European member states and future member states from the Western Balkans. Same goes if we talk about road infrastructure, railroad infrastructure. We should also talk about, as we try to invent this word and policy, digital connectivity of these countries with the European Union and between themselves. I mean, to make also the next step in integrating with the EU before actually politically are part of the EU. So looking also through the lens of the latest Eastern Partnership declaration which came out of the summit and the 20 deliverables until 2020, I think the area of future work in the several years to come is very wide, and if ambition is high, then you can achieve a lot. On the financial side and generally, because I've mentioned the EU, I'm not going into details because our next panel is about the future of EU. But we have, I fully agree with Marian Lupu that finally, whatever we talk about, it's a matter of money. When we discuss the policies of the EU in the next financial framework, shall we have a strong cohesion policy? What's going to happen with the agricultural policy, regional policy of the EU, the money related to building infrastructure, especially in the countries which still are lagging behind, mainly Central and Southeastern Europe. If we talk about social policies of the EU, I mean, these are important policies. They're recognized as important by the citizens, but at the same time, they cost a lot of money. And now with Brexit, with the difficulties within some member states to invest more, let's say, invest in the EU budget, we may face difficulties and we'll have to face certain choices. And it's again also about how much money and what kind of policies will be supported through the instrument of pre-accession assistance, What would be the funds dedicated to the neighborhood instrument, which is available, can be changed. Now is the time to discuss what kind of neighborhood instrument this could be. Of course, pre-accession cannot be open now to Eastern partners, but neighborhood instruments, especially the part which is related to the Eastern neighbors, can be changed in a way that it can become very similar to the pre-accession instrument. But all this should be followed closely by you as well, and you should have your input in this process. From that point of view, I could say that, for example, the participation or the active work of the Euronest Parliamentary Assembly, and I'm happy to see that it is active and delivering important messages, is one element, because their national parliaments of the Eastern Partnership countries cooperate closely with the parliaments, with the European Parliament. But I, now being chair of the European Affairs Committee of the National Parliament of Bulgaria, I realize the importance also of the interaction which is going on through the so-called Cossack meetings. These are the meetings of the committees of European integration of the member states. So I would propose, since these committees are open also to participation of the Eastern Partnership countries, if they wish so, I'll send a letter next week to all of them to explain the procedure and how this can happen. But I really strongly urge these committees to participate, to follow the discussions that are going on at the level of national parliaments. They're able to present their views to these meetings. And since many decisions are finally taken also at national level, national parliaments level, national governments level, also including Eastern Partnership and enlargement, it is very important that you become part of these discussions, even politically, before you are actually members of the European Union. I will finish by saying that now, with Bulgaria taking the presidency of the Council in the next 6 months, I myself will do my best to work in the direction to further strengthen the commitments of the EU at parliamentary level, but also at governmental level in the Council, to what has been decided in Brussels a few weeks ago. And I hope that we can stay in close coordination on all issues that you feel can be made better, can be decided in favor of the future common work between Eastern partners and European Union, and on all policies that now are being revised or developed, so that you can have your input and participation when these policies are decided, so that you are not just countries that will benefit or will follow certain policies, but that you are already participating in developing these policies. I think this is extremely important to change the way you see the cooperation between EU and Eastern partners. It's not one-sided. It should be a real common work on these issues. And it is happening already, but what depends on us will be to strengthen this process so that you feel equal when you come to our meetings, even if you are still not able to vote. Marian finished. What I have noticed in the years is that you have, despite the changes in the leading political forces, in Georgia we see always very committed young people who are sometimes inspiration for us who are already in. Because I feel that sometimes we value less our membership than they value the Union itself. So thank you for that to Victor and Tamar as well. On the issue that Marian mentioned, yes, anti-EU propaganda is very efficient. We sometimes feel that whatever we do is quite evident and people understand, but sometimes it's very easy to distract the attention. And it happens in our countries as well. And I guess that in countries like Moldova, Georgia, Ukraine even, it's even more difficult to counter that. And having said that, I believe that the situation within the EU is much better than it looks like sometimes because of this anti-EU propaganda, and I fully subscribe to what my colleague Vigenin mentioned. Now EU is much stronger, it's going upwards, but the fact is that it would take some time in order to how can I say, to reach the new equilibrium. I think this is important, but we learn how to react, how to respond, and I see a much more united union now, by the way, paradoxically, but the Brexit has made us more united and showed us the strength of the union. And here I have to mention that there is a huge difference between the Soviet Union and the European Union, if I may oppose to my Azerbaijani colleague, because Bulgaria was not a member of the Soviet Union, part of the Soviet Union, but at that time we had less political choices and less ability to influence process than now being part of the European Union. And it might sound maybe a bit idealistic, but yes, we have our voice and it's being heard if we are able to defend what we feel important for our country. And I think it was not possible in the past in different circumstances. And finally, on our Macedonian colleague, well, it's true that, of course, we should not talk only about money, but we should also avoid having too idealistic view about the Union and generally about the world nowadays. Every country who is part of the EU or wants to be part of the EU, of course, has to obey the basic principles, democracy, freedom of media, freedom of speech, human rights, and so on. There are a number of issues. Of course, there are countries that do not feel this is so important, and we cannot impose that, and we should not. We have to respect the choices. And that's why I finish by saying that I value very much the fact that in the past several years, EU has evolved from trying to squeeze all countries of the Eastern Partnership into the same policies. Now having this differentiation, I think that makes things much more realistic, much easier, and those who want to come closer, we have to be able to welcome them. Those who want to keep distance and select certain areas of cooperation, they're welcome, and maybe one day they have the ability to change these policies and come closer, and for the others, the other way around. But it's a matter of respect. I fully agree with that. We should not impose anymore, and we should communicate, discuss, work together, and find the best approach to every country which is in our neighborhood. Thank you.
I will be very